Okay, let's dig into this. We talk a lot about the big tech shifts in the 21st century AI, quantum, right?
Yeah, those are huge.
But there's this other revolution happening, maybe even deeper biotechnology. And it's not just about understanding life anymore, it's about, well, programming it.
And what's really striking here, this isn't far off sci-fi. The sources we're looking at today, especially this big report from April 2025, they frame this idea, programming life itself, as something that's happening now, accelerating, with massive implications.
That's right. We're diving into the final report from the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology, the NSCE. It's called Charting the Future of Biotechnology, an Action Plan for American Security and Prosperity. Catchy title.
Huh, yeah, but the message inside is pretty stark
Hmm.
and urgent. It basically says emerging biotech, particularly when you mix it with AI, it's not just another sector. It's going to fundamentally change, well, almost everything.
Everything like defense, manufacturing,
Agriculture, healthcare, you name it.
and the core assessment. It's kind of sobering. Despite the U.S. historically leading in biotech, the Commission feels we're, and I'm quoting here, falling behind in key areas as China surges ahead. They really don't mince words.
Which brings up a critical point, right?
Mhm.
If biotech is that powerful, what does falling behind actually mean? The report calls this moment a real turning point. They actually label it the next battlefield in strategic
The
competition.
next battlefield. Wow.
Yeah, and the choices we make right now, like in the next few years, they argue, will basically decide who leads globally for the next 100 years.
And they're specific about the timing, too, aren't they?
Very specific. They warn the window to act as narrow. Think years, not decades. It's presented as incredibly pressing. I mean, the NSCEB itself, Congress set it up back in 2022, specifically to figure out biotech's impact on national security and give recommendations.
So this wasn't just a quick study.
No, this report is the result of 2 full years of work. They talked to over 1,800 experts, scientists, industry folks, policymakers, international partners. It's meant to be a really comprehensive look.
And when they say national security, they mean more than just military stuff, right?
Oh, definitely. Their definition is much broader. It includes economic resilience, health security, food security, even energy security. It's a whole-of-nation perspective.
Okay. And their biggest worry.
The biggest concern, stated pretty bluntly, is the potential for a setback from which we may never recover if the U.S. doesn't get its act together fast. They really emphasize the urgency, maybe needing major shifts within the next 3 years or so.
3 years? That's soon. So, okay, play it out. If the U.S. doesn't act, if leadership shifts, what does the report say could happen?
Well, they paint a few worrying pictures. China could end up controlling critical intellectual property. They could develop advanced biological capabilities, maybe even weaponized ones that we can't counter. Or they could exploit our dependence on them for vital things.
Like medicines.
Exactly, like pharmaceuticals or their components. The report highlights what they term China's steel scale strangle playbook.
Steel, scale, strangle. Okay, break that down.
So acquire the intellectual property, sometimes through illicit means, then use massive state support to rapidly scale up production, and then potentially leverage that dominant market position, that chokehold, for strategic gain.
That's chilling. And they had that specific statistic about reliance on Chinese contractors, right? USvsChina.
They did. It's a stark number. Something like 79% of U.S. biopharma companies apparently rely on Chinese contract manufacturers like USvsChina for key parts of their work. That's a huge vulnerability the report really hammers on.
Wow. Okay, that really paints a picture of the potential dependency.
It definitely underscores the scale of the challenge, according to the Commission, and why they see such a need for urgent action.
All right, so that sets the stage. Urgent context, serious potential consequences. What did the NSCE back actually pinpoint as the core problems? Why is the U.S. in this position, potentially falling behind?
The report digs into several core structural issues holding the U.S. back. First, and maybe the most critical one they flag, is the lack of a cohesive national strategy. Unlike China, which apparently has this very deliberate, long-term, centrally coordinated plan for biotech, the U.S. approach has been more fragmented, sort of inconsistent across different agencies and administrations.
Okay, so no single national game plan. What else is slowing things down?
Federal R&D funding is another big one. It's stagnated, basically.
Yeah.
As a slice of the economy, it just hasn't kept up. And that tends to push research towards safer, more incremental projects instead of the really ambitious, potentially transformative breakthroughs you need to lead in a field moving this fast.
Right, so we're not investing boldly enough in the foundational science. What about actually getting those discoveries out of the lab and into the world? Commercialization.
Yeah, that's a huge bottleneck they identify. The report stresses how the U.S. struggles to translate cutting-edge science into actual products manufactured here at scale.
Why is that?
Several reasons. Things like not having enough of the right kind of manufacturing infrastructure,
Hmm.
a lack of patient, long-term capital for these really high-risk biotech ventures, and importantly, a regulatory system that they describe as incredibly complex.
Ah, the famous red tape.
Exactly. They call it a thicket of slow, unpredictable, and complex regulations spread across something like 15 different federal offices. Imagine trying to navigate that.
Sounds like a nightmare for a startup.
It is. And the commission argues it actually pushes companies and investment overseas looking for simpler pathways. Another critical piece is talent.
People.
Right. Both developing enough skilled workers here at home and, crucially, keeping the top international talent that comes here to study or work. The report says the U.S. isn't producing enough people with the needed mix of skills biology, engineering, data science, and top researchers from other countries often hit roadblocks trying to stay long-term. Meanwhile, our competitors are actively trying to recruit them.
So a leaky talent pipeline, basically. Homegrown and international.
Pretty much. And one last big area data. Biology today generates just massive amounts of data.
Terabytes of it.
And according to the Commission, the U.S. is really underutilizing it. We haven't treated biological data as the strategic national resource it is. We haven't built the infrastructure to create the large, standardized, AI-ready datasets you need for modern biotech R&D.
While others are treating it strategically.
Exactly. The report contrasts this sharply with countries like China, which are apparently aggressively collecting and leveraging biological data from around the world.
Okay, so let me recap the problems. Fragmented strategy, underfunded R&D, hurdles getting products to market, including regulation, talent gaps, and not making the most of our data. That's quite a list.
It paints a clear, definitely challenging picture of the situation. And tackling these interconnected problems is why the NSCEB puts forward this big headline recommendation: a minimum federal dedication of $15 billion over the next 5 years.
$15 billion. That sounds like a lot. Is that the government footing the whole bill, or?
No, and that's a key point in the report. They frame it very much as a catalyst.
Yeah.
The idea isn't just government spending for spending's sake. It's using that $15 billion strategically to unlock and accelerate much larger amounts of private capital and private innovation within the U.S. biotech ecosystem.
Got it. Kind of like seed funding on a national scale. And they propose a specific way to approach the competition, right? A two-track strategy.
Yes, exactly. Their strategy is basically twofold: make America innovate faster and slow China down.
Okay. Simple enough.
Well, the execution is complex. It means aggressively playing to America's strengths, our dynamic innovation culture, deep capital markets, commitment to responsible practices, while also putting measures in place to counter what they see as China's unfair non-market tactics and protect vital U.S. assets like our IP and data.
Right. Makes sense. So that's the diagnosis and the overall strategic thinking. But the real meat of the report is in the action plan, these 6 pillars they lay out for getting the U.S. back in the lead. Where do we start?
Pillar 1 is presented as, like, the absolute foundation. Prioritize biotechnology at the national level.
Okay, that sounds like it directly tackles that lack of a cohesive strategy problem we just talked about. What's the main idea?
The core thinking here is pretty straightforward. Unless biotech is elevated to a genuine national strategic priority, right up there with AI or semiconductors, U.S. efforts are just going to stay fragmented and reactive. So the goal is to establish its importance at the very top levels of government and really unify U.S. efforts to compete effectively, especially with China.
Makes sense. Make it a top-tier issue. How do they propose actually doing that, like concretely?
A really central recommendation is creating a brand new office, the National Biotechnology Coordination Office, or NBCO, and critically placing it right within the executive office of the president, led by a high-level presidential appointee.
So right in the White House structure.
Exactly. This NBCO would be the nerve center, the coordinator. Its job would be to sync up strategy across all the different agencies, help guide R&D investments, push for streamlined regulations, and just be the central hub for all things biotech policy. The commission felt past coordination efforts didn't have enough clout.
Okay, a single coordinating body with real authority. What else for this pillar?
They also recommend designating senior agency officials for biotechnology. Basically, key agencies deeply involved in biotech, think DoD, DOE, USDA, HHS, would each appoint a high-level official, like an assistant secretary, to be the dedicated champion for biotech within their own department.
So embedding leadership within the agencies themselves.
Right. Making sure biotech priorities are pushed internally and aligned with the national strategy coming from the NBCO. And the third piece is establishing an Office of Global Competition Analysis, OGCA.
OGCA, what's that about?
This would be a new office focused specifically on foresight. Its job would be to provide really data-driven analysis on how the U.S. is doing technologically compared to rivals like China, and proactively identify and track emerging biotech trends and their strategic implications. The report basically says the U.S. lacks this kind of centralized, forward-looking analytical muscle right now.
Interesting. So putting biotech at the top, embedding leaders in agencies, and building a dedicated foresight capability. Okay, let's translate that. If you're listening, maybe you're an engineer, maybe a student, what does this pillar mean for you, practically?
Well, this kind of national prioritization really opens up some interesting doors. You could potentially find roles in policy development, maybe using your technical background to advise the new NBCO, or working within one of those agencies that now has a senior biotech official pushing initiatives.
So working at that intersection of science and policy, exactly, there will be needs for people with technical skills to help design, say, the digital infrastructure for coordinating all this, like a biotech.gov portal they mention, or contributing to the modeling and analysis within that new OGCA Foresight office. For students, it definitely signals that interdisciplinary training is valuable, combining your science or engineering degree with policy, data science, maybe even national security studies.
And presumably more funding.
That's the hope. This high-level focus is likely to channel more federal R&D funding towards biotech areas deemed nationally important. That could mean more opportunities for grants, graduate research, postdocs, or careers in government labs or projects funded by these initiatives.
Makes sense. Are there ethical considerations tied specifically to this prioritization pillar?
Absolutely. I mean, when you elevate something to a national strategic priority, especially framed around competition, you have to be really careful about how those priorities get set and how resources are allocated. The report implies these decisions need to align with U.S. values. That OGCA foresight function, for instance. It can't just be about predicting the next hot tech. It needs ethical foresight, too, thinking about the societal impacts before we go full steam ahead.
That's a really critical point. Prioritization needs that ethical compass. Okay, ready for Pillar 2?
Let's do it. Pillar 2 is all about mobilizing the private sector to get U.S. products to scale.
Okay, this sounds like the answer to those commercialization bottlenecks we talked about, the infrastructure, the capital, the regulations.
Exactly. The goal here is to basically unleash the power of America's private markets by systematically tackling those major hurdles. It's about making it easier, faster, and frankly more attractive for U.S. companies to develop innovative biotech products, scale them up, and manufacture them here in the United States.
Okay, clearing the path. How does the report suggest doing that?
First big one, regulatory simplification. They recommend Congress basically direct the key agencies, USDA for AgBio, FDA for drugs and devices, EPA for environmental aspects to create faster, simpler, more predictable pathways to market for biotech products, and potentially have the new NDCO coordinate that effort.
Streamlining that regulatory maze.
Yeah. The Commission argues the current system is so complex and slow that it's a major factor pushing companies and investment to other countries. Second, address the funding gap.
Wow.
They propose establishing an independence investment fund. This will be a non-governmentally managed fund, maybe with a specific mandate to invest in promising biotech startups that are critical for national and economic security, things like domestic drug manufacturing or critical materials.
So not government picking winners, but an independent fund.
That seems to be the idea, to provide that patient strategic capital needed to get companies through the infamous valley of death for hard tech, where traditional VC funding might be scarce. It's meant to bridge that gap and also signal opportunities to attract more private investment.
Okay, a dedicated fund. What about the actual factories, the manufacturing capacity?
Develop a network of pre-commercial bioindustrial manufacturing facilities. The idea is for agencies like the Department of Energy and Department of Commerce to work together to set up these shared facilities. Companies could then access the specialized equipment and expertise needed to test and scale up their bio-based manufacturing processes, going from, lab bench to pilot scale.
Filling a gap in infrastructure.
Right. The report says the U.S. currently lacks enough domestic capacity for this kind of scale-up work, especially for industrial biotech, which again often forces companies to go overseas for manufacturing.
Makes sense. And under this pillar, they also tackle that dependency issue, the Chinese suppliers, head on.
Yes, this is a big one. A key recommendation is to prohibit use of certain Chinese biotechnology suppliers. Specifically, they suggest barring companies that work with U.S. national security agencies, DoD, DOE, the intelligence community, and also HHS, from using Chinese biotech suppliers that are deemed a national security risk.
Like WuXi AppTec and similar firms.
That's the clear implication, yes. It's a direct response to those concerns about data security, intellectual property theft, and supply chain vulnerabilities we discussed earlier, trying to reduce that reliance and secure sensitive data and production.
That's a pretty significant policy lever. So putting it all together for Pillar 2, what are the implications for our listeners, the engineers, and students?
Well, this pillar opens up huge opportunities in bioprocess engineering. Designing, optimizing, and running those scalable manufacturing processes, especially in these new proposed facilities. Expertise in regulatory science becomes super valuable, helping companies navigate these new, hopefully simpler pathways.
Right, understanding the rules of the game.
Exactly. And if you're entrepreneurial, that Independence Investment Fund could be the vital source of early-stage funding to get your biotech idea off the ground. Plus, there's a growing need for expertise in supply chain management, building resilient domestic supply chains and related cybersecurity to protect them, especially given the proposed restrictions on foreign suppliers.
So roles across manufacturing, regulations, startups, logistics, security. What specific skills should students focus on?
Deep knowledge in industrial biotechnology and bioprocess engineering is key. Understanding things like good manufacturing practices, GMP, and quality by design, QBD, will be essential for anyone wanting to work in biomanufacturing. Regulatory affairs is often overlooked, but it's a critical field. And for entrepreneurs, obviously, understanding the business and investment side.
And the ethical considerations embedded in this pillar, they seem pretty significant too.
Oh, definitely. With regulatory simplification, the big ethical tightrope is ensuring that making things faster doesn't mean making them less safe or compromising on efficacy or environmental standards. That's crucial. For the investment fund, ensuring transparent governance to avoid cronyism or just funding politically favored projects is important.
And the supplier restrictions.
Implementing those restrictions needs very careful thought to avoid crippling essential supply chains in the short term while domestic alternatives are built up. There are also ethical dimensions around impacting international business and collaboration, needing a balanced approach.
Right, complex trade-offs. Okay, Pillar 3. Maximize the benefits of biotechnology for defense. This sounds like where that next battlefield idea really comes into focus.
It certainly does. The objective here is pretty clear. Get the Department of Defense to proactively integrate cutting-edge biotech to develop next-generation warfighting capabilities, stay ahead of adversaries. But, and the report explicitly adds this, do it ethically.
Biotech for military use. That immediately raises some big ethical flags, doesn't it? How does the report suggest DoD handle that?
Well, interestingly, the very first recommendation under this pillar is for DoD to define principles for ethical use of biotechnology. They stress the need for DoD to establish clear guidelines upfront for how biotech can and should be used in military contexts. This covers everything from enhancing warfighter performance to potential environmental impacts and ensuring compliance with international law.
So setting the ethical guardrails first.
Exactly. The idea is to lead by example, ensure advancements align with U.S. values, and think through the implications before technologies are deployed.
Okay, good first step. What other key recommendations are there?
Another is to build commercial biomanufacturing facilities for DoD needs. The report suggests Congress direct DoD to partner with private companies to set up specialized facilities focused on biomanufacturing things critical for defense.
Like what kind of things?
Could be advanced propellants, new types of synthetic fuels, novel lightweight or protective materials derived from biological processes. Stuff the regular commercial market might not have an incentive to produce at the scale or specification DoD needs without a direct partnership.
Got it. Dedicated biomanufacturing for defense needs. And the third recommendation hits that competitive angle again.
Yes, it's about require outbound investment rules. The report calls for mechanisms, essentially, rules and regulations, to track and potentially restrict U.S. investments, like venture capital, from flowing into Chinese biotech companies or research labs that are directly helping China's military develop biotech capabilities, especially those that could pose a risk to U.S. national security.
So cutting off the financial fuel from the U.S. side that might help potential adversaries build military biotech.
That's the gist of it, yeah. Understanding and controlling those capital flows.
Okay. How can engineers and students get involved in this defense biotech space?
This pillar really opens up roles at that interface of biology, engineering, and national security. There are opportunities in actually developing defense-specific biotech applications. Think of advanced materials, high-energy fuels for microbes, better biosensors for detecting chemical or biological threats, or even contributing to developing those ethical frameworks we talked about, maybe around warfighter performance enhancement.
And building the factories.
Absolutely. Designing, building, and operating those specialized defense biomanufacturing facilities will require engineers. Plus, expertise in assessing dual-use technology will be critical.
Dual use. Explain that.
That's technology that has both civilian and military applications. Understanding how a seemingly peaceful biotech breakthrough could potentially be misused or adapted for military purposes, that kind of assessment skill will be in high demand.
Fascinating and, yeah, challenging. What specific specializations should students think about?
Strong backgrounds in material science, synthetic biology, chemical engineering, bioengineering are all relevant, especially if you combine that with an interest in defense applications. We might see more courses or even programs focusing on bioengineering for defense, or interdisciplinary studies blending engineering with ethics, international law, or security studies.
And the ethical considerations here seem particularly weighty.
They really are. Defining ethical limits for things like warfighter optimization. What does that even mean? It raises profound questions about consent, human enhancement, reversibility, the very nature of conflict. The outbound investment rules involve that tricky balance between economic freedom and national security. And the whole endeavor risks fueling an arms race if not handled transparently and responsibly. The report really stresses that leading ethically is part of leading strategically in this domain.
A crucial point. Okay, let's move to Pillar 4. Out-innovate our strategic competitors. This sounds like the heart of the scientific and technological race itself.
You could definitely say that. This pillar is all about reigniting the U.S. innovation engine. It focuses on ensuring researchers have access to the data they need, funding truly ambitious research goals, providing the right infrastructure, and critically, managing the safety and security risks that come with powerful new biotechnologies.
Okay, so boosting innovation. How does the report propose we do that? What are the key actions?
A real cornerstone recommendation is to establish a web of biological data, WOBD.
WOBD. Okay.
The idea is for the Department of Energy to create this centralized, secure national portal. It would make massive amounts of biological data standardized, cleaned up, ready for AI analysis accessible to researchers across academia, industry, and government labs.
Why is that so important?
Well, like we touched on, data is the fuel for modern biotech, especially AI-driven discovery. The report argues U.S. biological data is currently fragmented, stuck in silos, hard to use. Meanwhile, competitors are consolidating and exploiting data. So the WOBD is seen as a critical piece of national infrastructure.
A unified data hub built for AI. That sounds potentially game-changing for research. What else to boost innovation?
Establish centers for biotechnology and launch grand research challenges. The report suggests setting up maybe 6 dedicated centers, possibly within the existing national lab system. These would focus on interdisciplinary, collaborative research, tackling really big, ambitious, grand challenges.
Like what kind of challenges?
They give 2 specific examples. One is making biotechnology predictably engineerable, moving beyond the current trial and error approach towards truly designing biological systems like we design circuits or software.
Wow, okay. That's ambitious.
It is. The other example is making biomanufacturing scale up, predictable, rapid, and cost competitive, basically solving that bottleneck we keep talking about. The argument is that current funding often favors safer incremental work, and we lack the focused infrastructure for these kinds of transformative, high-risk, high-reward projects.
So dedicated centers and moonshot-style goals for engineering, biology, and manufacturing. What's the final piece of this innovation pillar?
Advance safe, secure, and responsible biotechnology. This calls for an executive branch entity, they suggest maybe within the Department of Commerce, to be specifically tasked with proactively identifying emerging risks from biotech. This body would also fund R&D into new biosecurity and biosafety tools and methods, develop best practices, and help consolidate and streamline oversight policies.
Getting ahead of the risks, not just reacting.
Exactly. The Commission notes the current U.S. approach to biosafety and biosecurity is often seen as reactive and fragmented, struggling to keep pace with how fast the science is moving.
Okay, so innovation driven by data, grand challenges, and proactive safety security. What are the opportunities here for engineers and students? What skills are needed?
Well, huge roles in designing, building, securing, and maintaining that web of biological data. That requires skills in data engineering, database management, cybersecurity, and AI machine learning. There are massive opportunities to participate in those grand research challenges, pushing the frontiers of synthetic biology, bioengineering, biomanufacturing process development, and a really important area, developing the actual technologies for biosecurity and biosafety. Think better detection systems, safer lab protocols, ways to secure dangerous pathogens or genetic data.
So, a blend of data science, cutting edge research, and security engineering. What underlying skill sets are crucial?
Strong computational skills are becoming almost non-negotiable programming. Data analysis, bioinformatics, AI. Interdisciplinary knowledge is key, being able to speak the languages of biology, engineering, and computation. And increasingly, expertise in bioethics, biosecurity policy, and responsible innovation frameworks. The report really frames safety and security not as roadblocks, but as essential enablers of trustworthy innovation.
And speaking of ethics, this pillar explicitly mentions responsible. What are the core ethical considerations tied to out-innovating?
Well, the WOBD raises big questions about data privacy and security, especially if it includes human genomic or health data. How do you make data accessible while protecting individuals? The goal of making biology predictably engineerable opens up profound ethical territory. What are the limits to manipulating life? How do we ensure such powerful capabilities are used wisely? And advancing safety and security always involves that tension between controlling risks and maintaining open scientific exchange. How do you prevent misuse without stifling beneficial research?
Deep questions. All right, pillar 5. Build the biotechnology workforce of the future. This gets back to that talent pipeline issue.
Exactly. The objective here is straightforward. Strengthen the U.S. talent pool across the board, government, industry, academia, and crucially, figure out how to retain top international talent while also fostering a broader bioliteracy in the general population.
Okay, how does the report propose we actually build this workforce?
First, targeting the government itself. They recommend the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, provide interagency biotechnology training. This means developing programs to give federal employees across all the relevant agencies, not just the science ones, a better baseline understanding of biotech, AI, biomanufacturing, and their implications, addressing that internal expertise gap.
Training up the existing federal workforce makes sense. What about the people needed for the new jobs, especially in manufacturing?
Maximize impact of biomanufacturing workforce training programs. The report calls for scaling up and better coordinating existing federal programs, like Innovativio and BioMade, that focus on training technicians and operators for the hands-on jobs in biotech labs and manufacturing plants. They stress needing standardized skills and credentials so people know what training they need for which jobs.
Preparing people for those specific technical roles we keep mentioning. And what about keeping the top scientists and engineers who come from other countries?
This is a big one. Authorize new green cards for biotechnology talent. The report directly recommends Congress create new, dedicated pathways for individuals with advanced degrees and critical skills in biotechnology to get green cards and stay in the U.S. permanently.
Making it easier for them to stay and contribute.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Especially focusing on talent from allied and partner countries. The goal is to stop the brain drain, where top international students get trained here and then leave because the immigration process is too difficult or uncertain.
Okay, that seems pretty impactful. So for engineers and students listening, what are the implications of this workforce pillar?
Well, directly, there could be opportunities to actually help develop the curriculum for some of these training programs. As biotech becomes a higher priority, you might see more appealing career paths opening up within government agencies. For students, it could mean better access to specialized training, maybe scholarships tied to national needs, and ideally, clearer pathways from education into biotech and biomanufacturing careers.
And for international students?
Those proposed new green card pathways could be huge, potentially making it much easier to plan a long-term career and life in the U.S. after graduation, assuming Congress acts on it.
And the ethical side of workforce development.
A key consideration is ensuring equitable access to these training programs and opportunities, making sure people from all backgrounds and regions have a chance to participate in this bioeconomy. And for the green card proposal, ensuring the process is fair, transparent, and balances the need for talent with appropriate national security checks.
Good points. Okay, last pillar, pillar 6. Mobilize the collective strengths of our allies and partners.
Right. The core idea here is that this challenge and the opportunity is too big for any one country to tackle alone. It's about working closely with trusted international allies to pool resources, expertise, talent, capital, while also collaborating to prevent misuse of biotech and establish shared global norms and standards for responsible development.
Makes sense. We can't just build walls in a global field like biotech. How does the report suggest we work with partners?
One specific recommendation is to include biotechnology in the State Department's ITSI fund. That's the International Technology, Security, and Innovation Fund. Expanding its mandate to explicitly cover biotech would provide dedicated resources for things like international policy coordination, funding joint R&D projects with allies, and working together to make global supply chains more secure and resilient.
Putting diplomatic resources behind international biotech cooperation.
Exactly. Another key area is expand regulatory diplomacy. This means stepping up efforts to get key allied countries on the same page regarding regulations. Things like harmonizing requirements for product approvals or maybe sharing data for risk assessments.
Why is that important?
Differing national regulations can be a huge barrier to trade and collaboration. If companies have to meet wildly different standards in different countries, it slows everything down and adds cost. Convergence makes it easier for innovations to reach global markets, assuming the standards remain high.
Okay, smoothing the regulatory path internationally. And what about sharing that critical data we talked about earlier?
Form reciprocal biological data sharing agreements. The report specifically suggests setting up formal agreements with key allies. You mentioned the UK, Australia, Japan, South Korea as examples to securely pool and share some of that AI-ready biological data.
Pooling data with trusted partners.
Yeah. The idea is to promote responsible, secure data practices that align with democratic values, creating a counterweight to data pooling efforts by nations that might have different approaches to privacy or security.
And finally, shaping the global rules of the road for biotech.
Support development of international norms and standards. The report really emphasizes that the U.S. needs to be actively involved leading, even in international bodies that set standards for biotechnology. Working through the State Department, NIST, and other agencies to ensure that U.S. values like safety, security, ethics, and transparency get baked into the global rules as they're developed. This is partly about countering influence from nations that might push for different, perhaps less responsible standards.
Proactively shaping the global governance of biotech. Okay. What does this international pillar mean for engineers and students?
It points towards more opportunities for international research collaborations, working with top labs and allied nations. There could be roles developing technologies or processes that meet these emerging harmonized international regulations. Opportunities in managing and securing those internationally shared data sets. And potentially careers in international science policy or global technology diplomacy, bridging science and international relations.
And the ethical dimension of international collaboration.
Well, sharing sensitive biological data across borders requires incredibly robust data privacy and security frameworks that respect different national laws while upholding shared principles. Developing global norms means navigating potentially very different cultural and ethical perspectives to find common ground on what responsible means. And you need to ensure collaborations genuinely benefit all partners and don't inadvertently leak sensitive technology to adversaries through complex international partnerships.
Lots to navigate there. Okay, so those are the 6 big pillars from the NSCE report. It's incredibly comprehensive, covering government strategy, investment, regulation, defense, the core innovation engine, workforce, and international partnerships.
It really is a wide-ranging blueprint. And, as the report shifts towards talking about actually doing all this, it makes a really powerful underlying point. Making this vision a reality. It fundamentally depends on the next generation of innovators. It's almost a direct call to you, the engineers and students listening, to step up and become what they kind of implicitly call biorevolutionaries.
The biorevolutionaries. I like that. It sounds much more active, more empowering than just, being a worker bee. So how do these big strategic pillars translate into concrete, exciting opportunities and career paths for someone with a technical background?
Yeah, the report definitely tries to connect the dots. For instance, that grand challenge of making biology predictably engineerable that directly fuels massive innovation in synthetic biology and engineering biology. It's about designing and building new biological functions, pathways, even organisms with the kind of precision we expect in other engineering fields, moving beyond tinkering.
Actually programming life, like we said at the start.
Yeah.
And the focus on data, the WOBD.
That's the rocket fuel for AI and drug discovery and biological design. Think about how DeepMind's AlphaFold changed protein structure prediction. Or companies now using AI to sift through vast data sets to find new drug candidates orders of magnitude faster. Engineers who can blend biology with data science and AI, absolutely critical. Building the tools, running the analyses.
So AI isn't just a tool, it's becoming the tool for biological engineering. What about making actual stuff? The manufacturing piece?
That's the whole field of advanced biomanufacturing, which gets a huge boost from the calls for new infrastructure and solving that scale-up challenge. This means developing things like continuous manufacturing processes instead of batch, using advanced automation and robotics, finding sustainable biological feedstocks instead of petroleum.
What kind of products are we talking about?
The report gives examples ranging from high-performance bio-based materials for things like military uniforms or equipment, all the way to potentially manufacturing common medicines like acetaminophen right here in the U.S., using biological processes to shore up supply chains. It's about using biology to make manufacturing faster, cheaper, greener, and more resilient.
Making real-world things with biology. What about food and agriculture?
Agricultural biotechnology is definitely highlighted. Things like developing crops that are more resistant to drought or pests, reducing water and pesticide use, or engineering soil microbes that can pull nitrogen from the air, cutting down on the need for synthetic fertilizers. They even mention the famous rainbow papaya story from Hawaii, how genetic engineering saved it from a virus, as a case study of the potential impact.
Using biotech for more sustainable and resilient food systems. Okay. What about monitoring our health or security?
That falls under biosensors and diagnostics, developing incredibly sensitive and specific sensors. Maybe wearable sensors for personalized health tracking, faster diagnostic tests for diseases right in a doctor's office or even at home, or sensors for detecting environmental pollutants or even biothreat agents. This needs people who understand molecular biology, chemistry, and engineering.
Okay, sensors for health and security. Any other really novel areas the report points to?
One fascinating one is biomining in critical materials, using specially designed microbes or proteins to literally extract valuable minerals, including those critical rare earth elements needed for electronics, from low-grade ores, mining waste, or maybe even seawater. It's pitched as a potential way to secure domestic sources of materials vital for technology and defense.
Wow, getting microbes to mine for us, that's pretty cool. And of course, the potential for medical cures.
Absolutely. Gene therapies. The report points to the recent breakthroughs, like the CRISPR-based therapies for sickle cell anemia, as just the tip of the iceberg. The vision is using these tools, CRISPR, gene editing, cell therapies, to develop actual cures, or at least transformative treatments, for devastating genetic diseases like muscular dystrophy, cystic fibrosis, maybe even complex conditions like diabetes or certain cancers. It's a huge area requiring deep expertise in genetics, molecular biology, and navigating the path to clinical use.
These are all incredibly powerful, tangible applications. Based on where these fields are going, does the report actually call out specific new kinds of job titles or career paths for engineers?
It does implicitly and sometimes explicitly. You see mentions suggesting roles like a biodesign engineer, someone focused on the forward engineering of biological systems, a bioprocess automation engineer, critical for running those advanced automated manufacturing facilities. The biological data scientist or AI specialist is clearly central. They also highlight the need for technically savvy regulatory affairs specialists who understand both the science and the rules. For the defense pillar, a defense biotechnology engineer. And very importantly, the biosecurity and biosafety engineer people focus specifically on making sure all this powerful work is done safely and securely.
Those definitely sound like the kind of jobs that could define the next couple of decades. What underlying skills does the report suggest are going to be most crucial to succeed in these roles?
They really emphasize a few key things. Interdisciplinary knowledge is huge. You can't just stay in your biology or engineering or computer science silo. You need to be able to bridge those fields. Strong computational skills are becoming baseline data analysis, modeling, simulation, AI literacy. Systems thinking, understanding how all the complex biological parts interact within a larger system, whether it's a cell, an ecosystem, or a manufacturing process. And then there's a skill the report really elevates: ethical reasoning and responsible innovation.
They stress that one specifically.
Yes, repeatedly. It's presented not as an add-on or an afterthought, but as a core competency for anyone working in this field. Understanding the societal implications, building safety and security in from the start, and finally, just plain old problem solving and adaptability, because the field is changing so incredibly fast.
That integration of ethics right into the core technical skill set feels like a really important message from the Commission.
It definitely is. It's not just about can we build it, but should we build it? And how do
Ah,
we build it responsibly, aligned with our values? And in the context of this report, national strategy.
The report also mentions something about the democratization of biotech. How does that fit into this picture?
Yeah, that's a fascinating counterpoint. While we're talking about national strategies and big investments, the report also acknowledges that the cost of core biotech tools like DNA sequencing and synthesis has just plummeted.
hmm
Plus, you have the rise of things like cloud labs where you can run experiments remotely.
Lowering the barrier to entry.
Exactly. It means innovation isn't solely the domain of giant corporations or government labs anymore. Smaller startups, academic labs, maybe even community biolabs or individual innovators can potentially make significant contributions. And some of the report's recommendations, like that Independence Investment Fund, seem aimed at supporting that more distributed innovation ecosystem.
So it's not just top-down strategy, but also enabling bottom-up innovation. It really does sound like this report, while it's a government document, is trying to speak directly to the listener, to the innovator.
I think that's absolutely right. It positions engineers, scientists, students as absolutely essential players, maybe even the most essential players in this whole national endeavor. Your
Yeah.
creativity, your technical skills, your dedication, and yes, your commitment to doing it ethically are presented as basically indispensable if the U.S. is going to navigate this biorevolution successfully and achieve that secure and prosperous future they envision.
So let's try to boil this all down. The NSCEB report delivers a really stark, but maybe necessary message. The U.S. is at this absolutely pivotal moment in the biotech revolution. There's incredible opportunity, but also really significant strategic risk, especially looking at the competition with China.
Yeah, it serves as both a pretty blunt diagnosis of where things stand and the challenges we face, but also as a bold, very comprehensive blueprint for action. A roadmap aimed squarely at securing American leadership in what they see as a truly critical domain for the future.
And it paints a really compelling picture of what that American-led future in biotech could mean, right? Translating these abstract ideas into tangible benefits for society. The power to defend the nation better, maybe with biomanufactured armor, or allowing soldiers to synthesize medicines they need right at the front line.
The ability to build a stronger, more resilient economy, using biology to secure critical minerals here at home, or bringing essential manufacturing back to the U.S.
The capacity to nourish a growing global population more sustainably, helping farmers grow more food with fewer chemical inputs, less water.
And, maybe most profoundly, the potential to heal, delivering on the promise of gene therapies, using advanced biomanufacturing to create cures or life-changing treatments for diseases that have plagued humanity for generations.
But the report is also really clear, realizing this positive vision, it's not a given. It hinges on the U.S. actually managing to aggressively out-innovate competitors, while at the same time staying true to its core values and ethical principles. That's the tightrope.
Absolutely. You sense this tone of maybe conditional optimism throughout the report. The challenges are laid out starkly. The potential for a serious setback is presented as very real. But it also keeps coming back to America's enduring strengths. Our innovation culture, our deep capital markets, our democratic values, our incredibly talented workforce strengths that can be mobilized if we choose to.
And that big number, the $15 billion federal investment, it's really positioned not as the government taking over, but as that strategic catalyst, right? Designed to unleash more private capital, empower the private sector, including entrepreneurs and innovators like you listening, with the government acting more like a strategic partner.
Exactly. So in the end, this NSCE report is much more than just another government study or policy paper. It's really a roadmap packed with potential opportunities, yes, but it's also framed as a profound call to service. It suggests that your innovation, your dedication, your ethical commitment aren't just nice-to-haves. They're actually essential ingredients for the U.S. to successfully chart this future in the age of biotechnology.
It really surfaces such a critical tension for our time, doesn't it? How do you balance that urgent, almost desperate need for rapid innovation to stay competitive on the global stage with the equally vital need for careful, thoughtful, ethical stewardship of technologies that have the power to literally program life? What does responsible innovation truly mean when the clock feels like it's ticking so fast and the stakes, nationally and globally, are perceived as being so incredibly high? That's definitely something for you to think about as you consider what your role might be in this unfolding biorevolution.